All right, just got some chicken. Ready to walk down from Rittenhouse area to Old City. I'm on, excuse me. I'm on 20th and Chestnut, and I guess I'll probably walk down Chestnut Street, maybe Market Street at some point. Probably wind down some alleys and stuff, and talk about jiu-jitsu. I don't really have a plan for what jiu-jitsu stuff I want to talk about today, but I'll think of something. Oh, here's something. So I'm competing again in a couple weeks, and one of the things that I'm doing is scouting my division, which is basically in an organized way, watching video of as many of my opponents as possible, or of as many of the people in my division as possible. Seeing what kind of stuff they've won when I watch the videos, watching what kind of tendencies they have when they're grappling, which is basically like what their game is, and then seeing if I can find what their strengths, weaknesses are, and then opportunities to, for me to implement my game, and then threats to my game. This is something that I picked up from Roddy Ferguson videos, actually, who is a former Olympic judoka. I picked these up from watching his videos probably 10 or 15 years ago. He used to talk about doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And very simple but clever way to get a lot of information about yourself, your opponents, your training partners, your division, really anything that you want to study. Some people use it to study different industries or businesses or whatever. So it's not just a jiu-jitsu thing or a grappling thing, but it's something that can be applied to a lot of different domains. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to do for my division. And what's interesting about that is there are some people in my division who have really unique games. They do things in jiu-jitsu that are pretty different than stuff that I've seen before. And it's interesting because most of the time I study people who are, in their 20s, maybe early 30s. But I'm a 43-year-old and I'm competing in Masters 3, black belt. And so when I study these videos, these are my peers. These are people that are the same size, age, weight, etc., belt rank as me. And it's really interesting to see how their games differ from the adult divisions. And, it's to be expected because a 43-year-old is not going to grapple the same way that a 20-year-old is going to grapple. But it's interesting nonetheless to see some of the crafty ways that they develop to still stay competitive, I guess. And there are, it's interesting. There are plenty of people who are still, physically dynamic, still move like much younger grapplers in those divisions too, which is pretty cool. 43, and people in their 40s, it's not that old, right? But it's also not that young either. And so you would expect there not to be that much dynamic movement, but you'd be surprised. Some of them really get after it and can move very, very well for people of any age. So anyway, what's cool in studying these videos is not only is it interesting to see how these guys develop their technical games, but it's, when you're watching IBJJF tournaments, there is a lot of strategy and tactics that happen in IBJJF tournaments. So it's interesting to see some of the wrinkles that you'll see people use when they have well-developed and well-thought-out games, and they compete often in IBJJF tournaments. It's cool to see how they take the techniques that they play and the systems that they link together and apply those to the structure of the point system. Meaning, like, for example, if there is a specific sweep that somebody does, it's interesting to see at what point during a 5-minute match do they do the sweep. It's interesting to see how they play the sweep Like, for example, if the sweep goes directly to side control, you'll sometimes see them sweep, go to side control, hold the position, and then not really fight that hard to keep the position against somebody who's scrambling to get back to a guard. And when the person recovers some kind of guard, it's usually a kind of guard that isn't too offensive right off the bat. Like, maybe they're in an over-under pass kind of situation. And they tend to be these positions where the person on top can kind of like milk the clock a little bit, let time run down. So anyway, it's just, it's been interesting for me studying the division. And this is something I've gotten in the habit of doing just in general, like when I'm doing video study, when I'm not competing. I'll pick a division, you know, maybe featherweight, black belt, adult, and then I'll look at the list of athletes on maybe an upcoming IBJJF event, because those are usually the ones that have the athletes' names posted. And then I'll go through the big names that I know, and I'll study as many of the athletes as I can in that division and see what kind of games they have, see what sort of tendencies they have, do that SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. And then, you know, imagine like, okay, well, if I was this grappler, how would I beat this other grappler? How do their strengths match up with the other's weaknesses? And it's kind of an interesting mental chess game to play when you're doing that. And it really gives you a lot of food for thought about how different styles match up with each other. It's a great problem-solving tool because you get to see how certain athletes solve certain problems that are common in their divisions, but maybe not so common in different divisions. Like what kind of problems pop up consistently. And it's also interesting when you study different divisions because for me, as an instructor, it gives me a lot of food for thought for like what kind of techniques and what kind of games can I teach my students that they might benefit from. So for example, right now I'm studying Masters 3 Black Belt Division, lightweight, and I'm looking at some of the games that I'm coming across, and there's a lot of my students who are either in their 40s or sometimes in their 20s or 30s, but who have games that are I can see that their games would fit and mesh really well with the games that I'm seeing in my video study of this division. And so it gives me a lot of food for thought about how to help them grow, because I can see people who are a little bit older and more experienced and see the kind of stuff that they do. That's kind of obvious though. That's just sort of the nature of film study. So that's one thing that's on my mind. What else is on my mind with jiu-jitsu? I guess I've been thinking a lot about like emotional state and like mental preparation. That's always sort of related to competition, confidence, and it kind of reminds me of when I first started competing years and years and years ago. I think maybe like 2001 or 2002. I can't remember, probably 2001. I did my first Kung Fu tournament, and I did 2 or 3 of them, maybe more, maybe 3. And what was interesting was when I was competing, the first time I competed, I just started assuming that I would have won, and then I would just get beat by everybody. And part of it was like, it wasn't necessarily like a lack of confidence, I guess, but it was more that maybe like a laziness, like, I don't know, like maybe I didn't believe that I could win, or if I could win, it would take so much effort that I just didn't have it in me to give that effort. Maybe that's what it was. Like maybe endurance, maybe I didn't have confidence because I didn't have the mental endurance to think that I could put in the effort to be successful. But at any rate, I didn't think that I could win. And an interesting thing happened during one of my matches in that tournament. It was like, there was a couple different divisions. There was like one division that was like a kickboxing kind of division where we could like punch, kick, throw, but you couldn't do any groundwork. And then there was another division which was like push hands, which is sort of all grappling, and you're trying to like push or throw each other, right? And I think it was in the kickboxing kind of division where I didn't think that I could win, but I realized that I didn't have to lose. And it was a really interesting revelation for me, where like it wasn't like this dramatic moment where, you know, it's like, wait a minute, I could totally win. I am the man. But it was more like, oh, I don't have to lose this match. It doesn't have to go that way. And it sounds like, obviously it's not the same thing, but it sounds like pretty much the same result. And I guess the result sort of is the same, but it's not the same sentiment. And it was a really interesting thing for me because, you know, I always sort of associated like winning psychology with like, you know, overtly like proactive and kind of, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but like can-do kind of attitude. And I think what clicked with me wasn't the can-do attitude. It was more like, why can't I do it? Like, why not kind of attitude. And it was, I don't know. I don't know why reframing it like that worked for me, but it did. And it was pretty empowering. And I won a couple matches in my next tournament. I won actually most of my matches, if I remember correctly. I don't know, it was a long time ago. But, damn, almost kicked that pigeon back there. Sorry, buddy. But then a couple years later, when I started doing jiu-jitsu in 2003, and I didn't do my first Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournament until maybe 2005 or 6 or something. And I kind of had the same revelation. Like, when I was competing, I had been training for a couple of years. I think I was a late white belt or early blue belt or something. Don't remember, but I do remember that I knew a fair amount of techniques, but under the stress of the tournament, I could only remember armbar from the guard. And what was interesting was I had that same feeling when I was on the mat competing, where like at first I didn't think I could win, and then I remembered how I felt in the Kung Fu tournament, and so in my matches I realized, like, wait, I don't have to lose. And so, but the interesting thing was I was so stressed out that I could only remember one move, which was armbar from the guard. So I did that to a couple people, and I got 3rd place, which is a pretty good result for my first tournament, I think. And after that, I started to compete fairly consistently for years after that. And what was interesting was that there were times where I won, like, from that sort of, that place of like, hey, wait, I don't have to lose kind of mentality. And then there were times that I won because, like, for example, at Purple Belt, my first tournament at Purple Belt, like 2 weeks after I got my Purple Belt, was the Pan Ams. And I won my first match, and I just barely lost my second match. I think I just passed the guard as time ran out, and had I gotten points for the guard pass, I would have won the match, but I didn't. But what was interesting about that was, after that tournament, I had tremendous confidence going into smaller tournaments, because, like, the Pan Am's, you know, at the time, one of the 2 big tournaments in the U.S., and I was a Purple Belt, which is an advanced division. And I felt, well, I could definitely hang in that division because I won one match decisively, and my second match I could have easily won if I had 3 more seconds on the clock. And so I had a ton of confidence because that was my first tournament at Purple Belt, which to me meant, hey, I think I can hang at Purple Belt pretty well. And there's no reason that it wasn't a there's no reason I can't win kind of thing. It was like, I genuinely felt like I was maybe like a national level competitive person at that point, which was kind of a cool feeling. And so at Purple Belt, I did pretty well because I had that confidence, and I really didn't think that anybody could beat me at Purple Belt, except for, you know, some names here and there, like people who were known, which is a different sort of part of the psychology thing. What's interesting about that is with the people who had names and who were well known, I noticed that when, like, it didn't really, my performance was kind of the same whether the person had a name or didn't have a name. Like, I would get real nervous beforehand if the person was well known, and there were times, but like once I got on the mat, it didn't really faze me. I just grappled. And I think one of my sources of confidence in that regard was once I had a few tournaments under my belt, I realized that the people that I was competing against, even the really good ones, didn't really feel that different or any different than the people that I was grappling with at the gym. Like, in the sense of they didn't feel like they were light years ahead of me in skill. They felt pretty comparable to my training partners. And so I felt like at that level, at like blue and purple belt, when I was competing a lot in regional tournaments, I felt like when I would go against, you know, somebody who had a big name on like a, you know, regional or national level, I would get beat a lot of the time, but I didn't really feel like I was totally outclassed, which was kind of a cool feeling. And so that was another source of confidence. So I think for me, like, three big sources of confidence when I was competing often were, the first was realizing that I don't have to lose. And then the second was doing well in a big tournament shortly after I got my purple belt. Or at least like knowing that I could hang in the purple belt division at a big tournament gave me a ton of confidence for smaller tournaments. And then the third thing was just realizing that those matches against, especially in no-gi, against good name grapplers, well known, I didn't feel like they were too different than the people that I was training with on a regular basis. Techniques were different, but I didn't feel like the quality of the person was different. Like, it wasn't like they had some mystical power, and I was like, holy shit, I really understand why they're like, they have a big name. They're so different. Like, they just kind of felt the same, and they still beat me, but didn't really feel like that different than getting beat by my training partners. So that was a source of confidence for me. And then what was interesting was when I started doing tournaments like no-gi pans at brown belt, worlds at brown belt in 2012, tournaments like that were, or like, you know, IBJJF tournaments like New York Open at purple belt, I started getting access to, especially in the gi, competitors who had distinctly different games than my training partners. And that was the first time that I had competed consistently against people who I couldn't really, like, didn't really feel like the people I was training with. And it wasn't that there was a physical quality thing that they had that was different. It was that the technique base that they were doing was different. There was a lot of like spider guard, lasso, berimbolo kind of people in my divisions at that time. And I didn't really have any training partners that could replicate those things in the way that I needed them to replicate it for me to prepare for those people. So when I would compete against them, like the stuff that I was used to doing, I would get stuck, and I didn't really have a good problem-solving mindset to be able to get through those problems at the time. And so I was left with this interesting situation where, like, you know, doing these big tournaments, I starting to lose a little bit of confidence, although not really, I guess. I mean, I guess I was. Like, I wasn't winning anything big, and I didn't really feel like I could prepare properly for the people in that division because I didn't have training partners that could replicate that stuff. But at the same time, too, I started to have lower back problems, which is an interesting thing that messed with my confidence a little bit. when, like, late purple belt, early brown belt, a big blow to my confidence was my lower back started getting really messed up, and I had to change my game a lot to become more of a top position player at the time. Because being on bottom, I remember there was a tournament that I did, a Nogi tournament, where I was trying to armbar somebody, and I was trying to armbar him for about, I don't know, a minute and a half, 2 minutes straight, but I was really like flexing my back. He had me stacked in an armbar from the guard, and I was really trying to hip into it, but I couldn't because he had his weight on me the whole time and he was stacking me, and I couldn't get out from underneath him. And I didn't realize the damage I was doing to my back just by trying to extend my hips in that holding position. But after the match, I remember feeling like my lower back felt dead, like just lifeless. And after that, I started to really have bad pain in my lower back, and it started to hit my sciatic nerve, and it started causing me a lot of problems, which was one of the first things that killed a lot of my confidence, because a lot of my game was based on being on bottom at that point. So it killed some of my confidence in competition. It helped me develop other aspects of my game in training, but it also, I started to notice that around that time, a lot of my peers in competition, people that were developing reputation in the competition circuit regionally and a little bit nationally, were on their second or third surgery, and they were getting pretty busted up. And that was my first major injury, and it really made me rethink my approach to jiu-jitsu. And so I started backing off of competing, partially because of the confidence issues that came with that, partially because I really didn't want to get lower back problems even worse, and I wanted them to heal up, and I wanted to be okay. I didn't want competing to cost my health, and that kind of sapped my enjoyment for competing. And so I stopped for a while, and didn't really pursue it. And then when I would jump into one, it'd be pretty sporadic here and there. I'd be real motivated, do the tournament, be motivated for like a month or two afterwards, and then lose motivation and kind of like taper off, and then just get back into a normal rhythm of training. And so it was kind of hard to get a rhythm again. So it's kind of interesting. I didn't really have a plan of talking about this stuff today, but it was interesting to sort of freestyle talking through it, because I never really realized that those were my, I guess, sources of confidence in competing until I started talking to you all about this. So I guess to recap, realizing that I don't have to lose was an interesting wrinkle. My confidence. Doing well at Pans at Purple Belt, my first tournament at Purple Belt, was a big boost to my confidence. And then realizing that, at least in Nogi, the matches against big names that I had didn't really feel that different than my matches on the training floor. But again, that changed when I started competing in higher level, like Worlds, and then like higher level key tournaments, where the games in my division of featherweight were a lot more specialized and weren't really anything like the people that I was training with. So yeah, kind of interesting. Never thought about it like that. Now what's interesting about that thing that I just talked about having a hard time replicating that like berimbolo, spider guard, leg lasso thing with my training partners. And I couldn't really, like I said, I couldn't really prepare for those divisions in a way that gave me confidence, because I didn't really have any training partners that played those specific games in those specific ways. So what ended up happening, one of the only solutions that I can come up with is to learn those games and then teach those games and then hope that they catch on. And that is something that is kind of a big part of my the school that my wife and I have right now, the Jiu-Jitsu company in Old City, Philadelphia. One of my favorite parts about being a teacher there and having the school is recognizing that there are things that my students do very, very well, and then there are things that aren't really present too much on the training floor, and that I would like to make sure that they learn and they're prepared for. So a big part of my job is seeing where those holes are and then studying those holds, whether it's certain positions, certain techniques, or whatever. And as long as those things are fairly high percentage and relevant, I try to create a system and then organize that system into a training program and then teach my students how to do it. And then some of my students will almost always gravitate towards some part of it. And so then, once that seed is planted, I try to study it further and try to encourage them to pursue it further and kind of see where they go with it. And almost a year and a half in now, I'm really seeing the fruits of that, because there are people at the school who play berimbolo, there are people who at the school play lasso or spider guard, all the guards that I didn't really have people to train with for. And now, when I compete, I feel like there's not really that many styles of jiu-jitsu that aren't represented on the mat. And so I know when I'm trying to prepare for something, I can look at my division and see what the people in my division do, and then know which training partners to train with and how to train with them to get the best training that I can to prepare for it. It doesn't mean I'll win, but it means that now there's a good chance for me and also my students to prepare for different styles. And if my students want to compete, then they can get a sense of the challenges that they might face in a tournament and then train with specific people to help them prepare for those challenges. And if they're not going to compete, there's a broad, diverse set of skills on the mat, which makes the mat more interesting. And so, let's say they go visit another school, San Diego or something, they shouldn't really come across anything that's too foreign to them on the mat. Like, they should, let's say they go somewhere and, somebody there plays some version of like De La Hiva X guard or something. Well, they can go train with that person, and they might have a hard time dealing with it because that person is skillful, but it shouldn't be completely foreign. Like, they should be able to say, oh, you know what, this feels a lot like Mike's guard, or this feels a lot like Janet's guard, or Dina's over-under passing, right? So, anyway, I think you get what I'm saying regarding that. And so I guess the gist of what I'm saying there is that I think for training purposes, one of the false ideas that I had as like a younger competitor at blue and purple belt was that it was about training with tough people. And I didn't really get corrected on that point. Like I didn't get burned by fire and realize that that's not always correct until later, because a lot of the no-gi people I was competing against weren't really doing anything that different than what my training partners were doing. So I thought, okay, well, I'll train hard with my training partners, and that'll prepare me for competition. But it's really, at least like my current understanding, is that it's more about finding people who can challenge the different skills that you're likely to come across, or the different positions, or the different techniques, different systems that you're likely to come across in those tournaments. So it's not necessarily about training hard with upper belts, but it's about finding people who can challenge you at the appropriate level in the specific thing that you're likely to run into in a tournament. So for example, if you go to a competition and you spend a lot of time wrestling, and you get real good at takedowns, and you're scrappy at scrambles, and you got a good front headlock, and that's a big part of your game, and that's a regular feature of your training for, then if you compete and run into somebody who wrestles, plays front headlock, and is good in those kind of wrestling style scrambles, then fantastic, you're prepared. You won't feel like there's really any mismatch. However, if your division is full of people who just pull guard and play De La Hiva guard and keep their head far away from you, then you might feel a little bit out of your element, because you're prepared for lower body takedowns, hard scrambles off of the takedowns, front headlocks, being front headlocked, but you might not be as prepared for somebody playing a daily Evo Guard or reverse daily Evo Guard than an inversion-based game where their head might not be available to you, and where you have to worry about getting your back to the finish line. So I think it's more about the specific skills. And so that's why it's important to have a diverse training floor, because when you have a diverse training floor, you should have people who can adequately represent those skills and make it so that even if you're not great at dealing with those positions, it shouldn't be completely unfamiliar to you, because you know somebody who does something similar enough that it feels like, oh yeah, this is kind of like what Mike does, right? So food for thought there. Getting pretty close to the gym right now. It's 4th Street, 4th and Market. Still drizzling out. Probably have another maybe 10 minutes or so that I could talk. It's hard to figure out what to talk about though. What else? What other stuff do you want to know about? Oh yeah. Oh, I guess like ego, right? I can talk about. So, how do you manage ego when you're training? So, I guess when people say ego, I guess they're usually talking about like sort of a narcissistic type of confidence. Like when they talk about grapplers who are egotistical and they let their ego get in the way, I think they're really talking about sort of a form of narcissism. Like people who are exceedingly confident and aren't considerate of anybody else's feelings, their training partners, their significant others, their families, their friends, whatever. And maybe they grapple in such a way as to not really care about other people's welfare. And when they lose, they can't believe it and they take it real hard. Like when something happens, they get submitted. They just get real upset, and emotionally they can't handle it because, you know, their ego gets in the way. And I think that's what people most of the time mean when they're talking about ego and how you got to get rid of your ego. I think it just kind of boils down to like, don't be a narcissist. As far as like having a competitive spirit and not like when you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're playing a game, and it's a game where it's important that there be like beneficial and unbeneficial situations happening, right? So like getting guillotined from the mount is not a beneficial situation. That is a unbeneficial situation. That is an undesirable outcome in the game of jiu-jitsu. And so there has to be like, if there's an undesirable outcome, for you to play the game and make progress, there has to be some driving force that pushes you to get closer and closer to the results that you want, or to the desired results of the game of jiu-jitsu. And I think that driving force is kind of a healthy sort of ego. It's something that says, you know what, I'm gonna do a little bit better today. Last time, they got their hand on my neck, and I could have peeled their wrist off, and they guillotined me. This time, I'm gonna get the hand off my neck. Maybe I'll put my head in a different spot, or I'll post on the hips when they try to go to the mount and hopefully roll them over, and then maybe get the hand off the chin. And that kind of ego that makes you not want to have that unfavorable outcome again, it's not the kind of ego that, like, if you lose and you get guillotined, it's not the kind of ego that tells you that you're a scumbag if you lose. It's the kind of ego that says, you know what, like, I think I can do better, and I want to do better because this is the goal of the game, and I want to move more towards the goal of the game. I want to improve. So it's a pretty benign form of ego that pushes you to improve. And it's not about, like, I guess for a lot of people, so for me, I don't necessarily think it's about being like superior to other people, like in a holistic kind of way. Like, I'm not, if I choke somebody, I'm not a great person and they're a bad person. If I choke somebody, it generally means that I've put more work in and I have maybe more skill in that position, or I was at the right place at the right time, or it could be a million other factors, but whatever happened, if I can choke that person and I can do it consistently, then that's a desirable outcome for the game that I'm playing. And it means that the work that I'm putting in is being put in a productive direction. But it doesn't mean I'm better. It doesn't mean they're better than me if they choke me, like holistically as a human being. It just means that the work you put in is good work, and keep on doing it like that. And then maybe put that same work into another area that you want to develop. So I guess that's sort of my short take on ego in jiu-jitsu. I'm always kind of conflicted talking about this kind of stuff because I'm not a psychologist. I didn't study psychology in any academic format. I don't think that really means anything as far as like my ability to talk about these things. But I think what it does mean is that maybe I'm a little bit bashful about using some terminology because maybe I'm worried that I might not use it properly. But I think you all get what I'm saying, and I'm not trying to like, you know, be a know-it-all or say, hey, this is what ego is and this is how it affects people. This is just my experiences with it, and this is to the best of my knowledge how it goes. Anyway, I'm back at the jiu-jitsu company, ready to do some more jiu-jitsu. I love it here. This is my school, and Angie and I made it a place that we both love to be. So it's at 31 South 2nd Street. Come and train. Thank you. Bye.